What's up guys, James here from BootWizard Boot Reviews, and today we are going to be taking on a pretty heavy topic. We're going to be talking about how the current global situation, the current global pandemic is affecting the football boot market and how that's going to affect each major company coming out the other end of it, and also how that's going to affect some of the smaller companies as well. A quick heads up before we jump into this, I am going to refer to what's going on in the world as the pandemic or the global situation, because YouTube gets very upset if you mention the actual name of the thing and potentially ends up demonetizing your channel or your videos. So I'm not going to take that risk. Just a bit of admin so you know why I'm avoiding using that phrase. Of course, like the video, get subscribed to pick up all of our future videos. I post 3 times a week, and let's jump into it and see how it's affecting the football boot industry right now. So the easy takeaway from the current lockdown and quarantine situation that almost every single country finds itself in, especially in Europe, is that boot releases have been pushed back, they've been postponed, and we are getting far fewer. Now, we would normally expect to pick up at least one major release from Nike, Adidas, Puma, every single month. New Balance are pretty regular as well. And since this kind of really ended up in high gear, we've only seen the Neymar release for the Copa America, which isn't happening. We have seen Adidas drop the Locality pack very recently, although ironically, with it being called Locality, it's not available in Europe yet. Europe is kind of the new epicenter of where this is happening, and they haven't taken the decision to release the boots here, so I haven't got my hands on them. But in the US and in several other territories, they're already available. But you get the idea. We can't go out and play football, there's very few places where you can, so there's less demand for the product. And the bigger issue really is that this global pandemic has caused so many companies to lay off hundreds and thousands of its staff, or at least furlough them, and people just don't have incomes. They're potentially completely unemployed. The current unemployment rate in America is at its highest since the Great Depression. So people just don't have the income to be spending on consumer goods, especially ones that could very much be considered luxury items. Things like football boots, most of us have a pair and we don't need another pair, we just like to get them. This whole global situation means simply not an option right now. So every company has pulled back and postponed its own releases in order to shield itself from a huge financial hit on certain releases and ensure they still get hype and they still have their products bought when we eventually come out the other end. But it's not quite as simple as companies postponing and then releasing later and everything going back to normal. Every company has been affected in a very different way from this, and the way that they're going to come out the other end of this whole pandemic is going to be very, very different. I'd like to thank the Gaijin Boot blog for the inspiration for this video with one of his blog posts. If you want to check that out, I'll put it down in the top comment. And similarly, Daniel Roberts at Yahoo Finance, his article informs a large portion of the finer details of this section of the video. So starting with Nike, because as the title of this video suggests, they are the company that's set to come out of this in the best shape, at least financially. And the way that we can see that is because, quite simply, from the start of the year until now, Nike has experienced a 12% drop in its stock value. Now, that's not great, and it's not anything any company wants to experience. But when we compare that to Adidas, which is over 30%, and Under Armour, which is over 50%, they're looking in pretty good shape. Most recently, when Nike provided their earnings report, they even managed to show that they are exceeding the expectations set by Wall Street, which, given the current climate, is pretty incredible. And they're doing that because of their e-commerce. Their e-commerce growth in China alone is plus 80% just based on users of their app since this all started. Now, of course, people can't go out, they can't go to the stores, so people are turning to online shopping in order to pick things up. So an increase would be likely. But there's such a big demand for these Nike products that as a whole, an 80% increase in app use is huge, and the strength of Nike's e-commerce department really is keeping them in a great situation. Nike have kind of been accidentally preparing this for a while as they gradually take products away from third-party retailers and standalone brick and mortar stores and push people towards buying them direct from Nike, direct from the Nike website, and direct from the Nike app. They've been doing this for a long time, and the most recent example is the Wavelength Pack, which they've only just released to places like ProDirect, Soccer.com, things like that, but they've been available through the Nike app for a very long time as a Nike exclusive product. I would suggest that were it not for the current global situation, that Wavelength Pack would not have made it to places like ProDirect, and it would have been Nike exclusive only. By pushing people towards Nike's e-commerce in football and generally as a whole, they've already got a dedicated user base ready to go out and pick up their products when they can't go into stores and buy them. So Nike really have been preparing for this, albeit accidentally. So the second of the big two, Adidas, they're not faring quite so well. We've already mentioned that their stock is down 30% since the start of the year. Now, while that's very much not good, there are many companies struggling more than Adidas are in this area. However, if we take a look at the company's actions, we can see how much this is really affecting them and how much they are seriously worried about this situation. So across the US, towards the start of the lockdown and quarantine, every single brick and mortar store started to close down that was not an essential service. So using their competitors as comparison, Nike stores closed, Lululemon stores closed, Under Armour stores closed, Adidas chose to try and remain open. They sent a memo out to all of their stores, basically in a very ham-fisted way of saying, we're all a team, we need to work together to give people what they want and to beat this. Now, it's completely the wrong decision, and after a huge social media backlash, they kind of went backwards on their own decision and did close their stores. But they were so desperate to keep those stores open and keep revenue coming in that they were willing to risk the safety of their employees and other people who would go to the store. On top of that, Adidas is a German brand, and they have asked and been approved for 3 billion euros of emergency loans to help the company in this time. Now, there's a whole different discussion to be had over whether you believe that a company the size of Adidas should be able to gain 3 billion euros worth of assistance from a government, or whether that assistance should probably be going to other smaller companies or people who are out of work, because does Adidas really need that amount of money? And if it does, what is going on behind the scenes? I'm sure you're picking up my kind of viewpoint on whether I think that Adidas should be receiving 3 billion euros. But anyway, they've had to ask for it, they have received it, and that shows the kind of trouble that Adidas are potentially in as a result of this situation. So the final piece of the big three before we touch on some other brands, Puma. And Puma are kind of sitting in between Adidas and Nike at this point. They're not performing quite as well as Nike have switched so many of their consumers over to e-commerce, but they don't seem to be struggling, or at least not publicly, as much as Adidas are. All of these three brands, much of their issue has come from the China area. China as a whole is a huge market for all three brands. And while Nike have managed to switch many people over to e-commerce, Adidas haven't managed to do that, and they're reporting a $1 billion loss just from the Chinese market over the first quarter of this year. That is massive. Puma, on the other hand, are going to report losses, but not to the same extent. And Puma's biggest issue is that they initially prepared for a short impact of this coronavirus and that they would get out of it very quickly. However, that's not the case, and they've had to go back on their initial statement and basically say that they don't think that any of their businesses will return to normalcy anytime soon, as this whole pandemic drags out a little bit further. But there's no massive warning signs. Yes, their stock is down. Yes, they're having problems, but I'm not anticipating for anything major to affect Puma coming out the other side of this. I recently did a video on Puma and why I thought Nike and Adidas should be worried about them, not just because of their football boot innovation, but also because of the way that they've attacked the market and their financial prowess and how they're dealing with sponsorships. And considering their recent and very public pursuit of getting Raheem Sterling over to their brand, and the fact they're still willing to pay 100 million euros to try and get a player in their boots, I think shows that they're not struggling too much, and long term, there's not going to be any issues coming out of Puma. Before we finish up with Under Armour and New Balance, I do want to talk about brands that have a very strong domestic market presence. And this was brought up excellently by the Gaijin Boot blog in his article. Companies like Lotto, Diadora, Mizuno, Asics, they all have a very strong domestic market presence, which means that worldwide demand isn't their primary concern. So it actually means that when we start to come out the other side of this, we may see them have the ability to recover a lot faster than these brands that are so reliant on selling all around the world to multiple countries, multiple territories that are super infected. And companies like Mizuno or like Diadora or Lotto, which have a very strong base in their home countries, and maybe not so worried or so affected about this China problem, which is what has caused the huge issue with Adidas, Nike, Puma, because they're so reliant on this massive market, which these more domestic-based companies are not. So for what feels like the millionth time, let's talk Under Armour's woes. If you want to see my full breakdown of why I think Under Armour might even pull out of the football boot market, which I made before this even happened, then do click in the corner. But Under Armour as a whole, they've posted 6 consecutive quarters of decline. They have a whole plan in place to rejuvenate the company. That's fallen flat on its face because of the whole global pandemic situation. And this is just, for me at least, another nail in the coffin. They're already not putting investment and money into football boots, although strangely they do seem to have actually released a boot during this pandemic in places in Asia and also in the US. Like, their football boot marketing strategy is terrible at best. They're not putting the money behind it, and they simply don't seem to care. And I just think that this whole situation coming in, we've seen Under Armour have a 52% stock decline since February. This is massive. This company is in trouble. Football is not its primary focus, and it just doesn't look like it's continuing to give any focus or support to that branch of its operations. So, do Under Armour come out of this? Yes, they're a big company, but yes, they will be heavily damaged. And I also think that this is just going to be another element where we see Under Armour start to phase out of football. I just can't see them continue to pump money into something that is essentially a failing enterprise, especially when right now they don't really have that money. And that is my Boot Wizard breakdown of how I think that the current global situation has affected most of the major companies, and also how I think it's going to affect these companies coming out the other end of the pandemic. Now, obviously, I think that Nike are going to come out of this very strongly and possibly in a position to continue to dominate the market, and the influence this is having on Adidas could really have an impact over the next few years. We might not see it immediately, but it might be something that affects them in the future. But they're such a huge company, who knows? I would like to point out I'm not an expert. I don't trade stocks and shares. This is all my opinion based on what I've read and what I've researched. You can completely disagree with me, and if you want to do that, drop your opinions down in the comments. I'd be very interested to hear what you think. Hit that like button if you want to see more videos like this on kind of the inside of the football boot industry. And of course, get subscribed to pick up all of my future content. I post 3 times a week. But that's all from me here today. Have a good one. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.